Queen XL Zora sat on her throne, her sharp golden eyes scanning the holographic war map before her. She was the ruler of the Selvok Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. For centuries, her people had conquered world after world, forcing weaker species to bow before them. The latest rebellion, however, was becoming an irritation. The hologram flickered, showing a spinning image of Ardent 4, a once thriving human colony now under Selvok rule. Red markers covered the map, indicating regions where resistance forces had attacked the Empire's soldiers. The reports were troubling. Entire squads wiped out, supply lines destroyed, strategic outposts mysteriously abandoned. This is unacceptable. Zora's voice was sharp, her mandibles clicking in annoyance. Humans should not be capable of this. They are weaker than us. They do not have our technology, our strength, our intelligence. General Vekran, her most trusted commander, shifted uneasily. Your Majesty, we have underestimated them. The humans on Ardent 4 fight like no other species we have conquered. It is as if they know our every move before we make it. Zora's claws tapped against the armrest of her throne. Explain. Vekran hesitated before answering. There is a rumor among the soldiers. His voice dropped lower. They speak of a single human, a warrior unlike any we have faced before. Some believe he is only a myth, but others claim they have seen him in battle. The queen let out a sharp laugh. A human. A single warrior defeating my armies. Do your soldiers fear ghosts now, Vekran? The general stiffened. Your Majesty, I do not believe in myths, but I cannot ignore the reports. He tapped the control panel on his wrist, and a grainy video projection appeared in the air between them. The footage was shaky, taken from the helmet camera of a fallen Selvok soldier. The scene was dark, the ruins of a destroyed outpost flickering with fires. A squad of Selvok troops moved cautiously through the wreckage. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the screen. A blur of movement. A single human emerged from the darkness. He moved faster than the eye could track, weaving between the Selvok soldiers with impossible speed. The camera trembled as shots were fired, but the human dodged them, his body twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. One by one, the soldiers fell. The last thing recorded was a glimpse of the warrior's face, calm, focused, and relentless. Then the screen turned static. Queen Zora's claws stopped tapping. She leaned forward. Who is this? Vekran's mandibles tightened. His name is Captain Elias Voss. According to our intelligence, he was a highly trained soldier before we conquered Ardent 4. He disappeared during the initial invasion. We assumed he was dead. We were wrong. Zora narrowed her eyes. A single human cannot defeat an empire. Vekran nodded. No, Your Majesty. But this one fights like an entire army. He strikes without warning, vanishes before reinforcements arrive, and leaves nothing but destruction in his path. He hesitated before adding, some of our troops refuse to fight. They say he is not a man, but a demon, a phantom. The queen growled, her mandibles snapping shut. Enough. I will not allow fear to spread through my ranks. This human, Voss, is nothing more than a soldier. A skilled one, perhaps, but nothing more. I will end this rebellion myself. Vekran's eyes widened. Your Majesty, that is unnecessary. She silenced him with a wave of her clawed hand. If my warriors fear this human, then I will show them that he bleeds like any other. Prepare my warship. We leave for Ardent 4 immediately. Vekran hesitated, but he knew better than to argue. He saluted and turned away, his heavy footsteps echoing as he left the throne room. Zora remained seated, watching the flickering image of Elias Voss, a human warrior, a legend. The idea was ridiculous. And yet, something deep inside her, a feeling she rarely experienced, made her hesitate. Was it curiosity, or something else? No, It did not matter. She would bring the full force of the Selvok Empire to Arden IV. She would crush this rebellion. And if this human warrior truly existed, she would make him kneel before her. The warship Dreadfang cut through the void of space like a silent predator, its dark metal hull reflecting the cold light of the distant sun. Inside, Queen XL Zora stood on the command deck, her golden eyes locked onto the planet below. Arden IV, the human colony that had become a thorn in her empire's side. Her forces had conquered this world months ago. By now, the humans should have been broken, their will crushed. But instead, the rebellion had grown stronger. The rumors had spread. Soldiers whispered about a lone human warrior striking from the shadows, a ghost, a myth, a force of nature. XL Zora did not believe in myths. "We land in 1 hour," General Vakrin reported, standing at attention beside her. His battle armor gleamed under the ship's lights, the insignia of the Selvok Empire displayed proudly on his chest. "Good," XL Zora said, her voice cold. "Have our troops secured the outposts?" Vakrin hesitated. "Not all of them." XL Zora turned to him sharply. "Explain." Vakrin's mandibles twitched in frustration. "Our forces advanced on Sector 12 yesterday. They outnumbered the humans 10-1. But they never reported back." Silence filled the command deck. The other officers shifted uneasily. XL Zora narrowed her eyes. "Are you telling me an entire battalion has vanished?" Vakrin gave a slow nod. "We sent a reconnaissance drone this morning. This is what it recorded." He tapped a control panel, and a holographic image flickered into existence. The Queen watched as the camera swept over Sector 12, or what was left of it. The Excelvok outpost was in ruins. Black smoke curled into the sky. The remains of their war machines scattered like broken toys. Bodies of fallen soldiers lay motionless, their weapons untouched. No signs of a battle. No gunfire, no explosions, only silence. Then the footage blurred. A shadow moved between the wreckage. The drone's camera tried to adjust, but the figure was too fast. Just a glimpse. A human. A lone warrior. Then, static. XL Zora's claws curled into fists. "This is unacceptable." Her voice was sharp as steel. Vakrin took a deep breath before speaking. "Your Majesty, I must advise caution. This human, Voss, he is not like the others. He fights with a precision we have never seen. He doesn't strike for glory. He doesn't waste movement. He fights to win." The Queen turned to him, her golden eyes burning. "And what do you suggest? That we flee? That we fear one human?" Vakrin lowered his head. "No, Your Majesty. I suggest we adapt." XL Zora let his words hang in the air for a moment. Then she exhaled. "Send the shadow claws," she ordered. A ripple of tension spread through the room. The shadow claws were her elite assassins, trained to eliminate high-value targets with ruthless efficiency. If this human was as dangerous as they claimed, then she would send the best. Vakrin nodded. "They will not fail." XL Zora turned back to the hologram of Arden IV. She stared at the battlefield below, at the wreckage, at the mystery. And for the first time in her reign, she felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The ghost in the ruins. Far below, in the war-torn forests of Arden IV, Captain Elias Voss watched the sky through the scope of his rifle. The Excelvok warship was descending, reinforcements. He had expected this. The battle was not over. It was only beginning. He crouched behind a ridge, his armor scratched and worn, his breathing steady. His squad, what was left of it, waited nearby. 3 other humans, each hardened by war, each willing to fight until the last breath. Voss spoke quietly into his radio. "They've arrived. Stay low. Stick to the plan." "Copy that," came a hushed reply. The Queen herself was coming to finish this fight. That meant they were running out of time. Voss checked his weapons, his knife, his ammunition. Then, without a word, He disappeared into the shadows. The battlefield was awake. And so was he. The Excelvok warship Dreadfang landed with a heavy tremor, its massive hull shaking the war-torn ground of Arden 4. Inside the command center, Queen Excel Zora stood tall, her golden eyes scanning the battlefield through the ship's reinforced viewport. Her army was assembling below, forming into tight units, preparing for a decisive strike. This rebellion would end today. Standing beside her, General Vakrin spoke in a firm voice. "Your Majesty, the Shadow Claws have deployed. They will locate and eliminate the human warrior." Zelzora nodded but said nothing. The Shadow Claws were the deadliest assassins of her empire, trained in stealth, speed, and silent execution. No one had ever escaped them. Yet, deep inside, she felt a strange unease. She dismissed the thought. This was just another battle, another species that needed to be reminded of the Empire's dominance. But something about this human, Elias Voss, was different. Hunting the myth. Far from the Selvok base, in the ruins of a fallen city, Captain Elias Voss moved through the shadows like a ghost. His rifle was slung over his back, his combat knife gripped tightly in his hand. He had fought in wars before, but this was something else. He wasn't just fighting soldiers. He was fighting a legend of his own. The Excelvok had sent their best. Voss had heard of the Shadow Claws, invisible killers, silent hunters. They were fast, brutal, and efficient. But he wasn't afraid. Instead, a small smirk formed on his lips. Let them come. He crouched beside an abandoned vehicle, scanning the area. The city was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just the distant hum of the Selvok war machine. Then he saw it, a faint shimmer, barely noticeable, shifting through the rubble. Cloaking tech. The Shadow Claws were already here. Voss didn't move, didn't react. Instead, he let them think he hadn't seen them. He counted. 1, 2, 3. 3 hunters, maybe more. Slowly, he reached for a small device on his belt and pressed a button. A high-pitched EMP pulse spread through the air. The effect was instant. 3 cloaked figures glitched into view, their forms flickering as their invisibility failed. Their armor was sleek, their weapons razor-sharp. For a single second, they hesitated. That was all Voss needed. He moved. With lightning speed, he dropped low, avoiding a plasma blade that slashed through the air above his head. He lunged forward, driving his knife into the first assassin's chest. Before the others could react, he rolled behind cover, grabbing the fallen enemy's weapon. A quick burst of plasma fire took out the second assassin before they could recover. The third one was smarter. It vanished again, its cloak rebooting. Voss exhaled slowly, gripping his knife. The silence returned. Then, a whisper of movement. He spun just in time, raising his blade to block an attack. The assassin's energy sword clashed against his knife, sparks flying. For a brief moment, they locked eyes. The assassin was fast. Voss was faster. With a precise twist of his wrist, he deflected the attack and drove his elbow into the alien's throat. The Shadow Claw staggered, just enough for Voss to finish it with a quick, efficient strike. 3 assassins, all dead. Voss wiped his knife clean and looked toward the horizon. The Excelvok would know by now. They would send more. He activated his radio. Shadow Claws neutralized. A voice crackled through his earpiece. "Copy that, Captain. We're in position." Voss nodded to himself. The next phase of the battle was about to begin. Zelzora's realization. Back at the command center, Queen Excel Zora stood still, her golden eyes locked onto the holographic map. A red warning flashed on the screen. Her Shadow Claws had failed. Impossible. Her warriors, her best assassins, had been eliminated by one man. The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Finally, Vakrin stepped forward. "Your Majesty, what are your orders?" Zelzora clenched her fists. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. This human, this Elias Voss, was not a myth. He was real. And worse, he was winning. Taking a deep breath, she turned to her forces. Prepare for full assault. We will not stop until this human is crushed. Vakrin hesitated. Your Majesty, what if he cannot be crushed? Zelzora's eyes burned with determination. Then we learn what it means to fear a human. A heavy silence filled the command center of the Dreadfang. The air was thick with tension, and every officer on the deck avoided Queen Zelzora's gaze. The report had just arrived. Her elite assassins, the Shadow Claws, were dead, killed by a single human. Zelzora's claws dug into the metal armrest of her throne. This was no ordinary rebellion, no mere skirmish. This was war. She turned to General Vakrin, her voice calm but sharp. Deploy all available forces. Leave no sector unguarded. I want this human found. Vakrin hesitated. Your Majesty, if we spread our forces too thin. She stood abruptly, her golden eyes flashing. Then I will lead the hunt myself. Vakrin stiffened in shock. Your Majesty, that is too dangerous. The battlefield is unpredictable. This human is unlike any warrior we have faced. Zelzora stepped forward, her tall, armored frame radiating power. Then I will see him with my own eyes. Without another word, she strode toward the ship's deployment bay. If the legend of Elias Voss was real, she would face him herself. The city of ghosts. Meanwhile, deep in the ruined city, Captain Elias Voss knelt on a crumbling rooftop, scanning the battlefield through his rifle's scope. He could see them now. Hundreds of Selvok soldiers moving into position, their formations precise, their weapons primed. They weren't searching anymore. They were preparing for a final assault. Voss smirked. So, they were getting serious. A voice crackled in his earpiece. Captain, enemy forces are closing in from all directions. I see them, Voss murmured. Keep your positions. Wait for my signal. His small team, the last survivors of Arden IV's resistance, was hidden across the battlefield, waiting like vipers in the grass. Voss adjusted his scope. That's when he saw her. A tall figure, draped in black and gold armor, walking at the front of the Selvok forces. He exhaled slowly. So the Queen had arrived. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a challenge. The trap is set. Zelzora marched forward, her presence alone making her soldiers stand taller. She had never needed to prove her strength before. But this was different. The streets were too quiet. The city too empty. Something was wrong. Then, a single shot rang out. A sniper round flew through the air, hitting a supply drone and triggering an explosion. Smoke and fire erupted around the Selvok troops. From the ruins, the humans struck. Gunfire rained from above, rebels emerging from the shadows, striking with ruthless precision. Grenades exploded, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Zelzora barely had time to react before 3 of her soldiers fell beside her. An ambush. Her mandibles clicked in frustration. This was not a reckless attack. This was a strategy. And then she saw him. Emerging from the smoke, moving like a shadow through the chaos, was the human warrior, Elias Voss. Their eyes locked. For the first time in her reign, Zelzora felt something strange, a thrill. This was no ordinary opponent. This was a hunter. And he had been hunting her. A battle of legends. The battlefield blurred around them. Zelzora charged forward, her energy blade igniting. Voss moved sideways, dodging just in time, his knife flashing in the dim light. Their weapons clashed. Sparks flew. Zelzora was fast. Voss was faster. She struck high. He ducked low. She swung wide. He twisted, countering with a quick strike that barely missed her armor. Their movements were almost a dance, one of instinct, skill, and sheer determination. Then, a mistake. A blast shook the ground beneath them. The floor cracked, sending both warriors tumbling into the ruins below. Dust and debris filled the air. The sounds of battle faded above them. Voss groaned, pushing himself up from the rubble. His rifle was gone, his knife still in his grip. Across from him, Zora stood, brushing dust from her armor. For the first time, there were no soldiers, no armies, just them. The queen tilted her head, studying him. "You are not what I expected, human." Voss chuckled, wiping blood from his lip. "And you talk more than I expected." A slow smile crossed Zora's face. This was going to be interesting. She raised her blade. "Then let's finish this." Voss grinned, flipping his knife in his hand. "Let's." The real battle had just begun. A heavy silence filled the ruins as Elias Voss and Queen Zora stood facing each other. Above them, the battle still raged. Gunfire, explosions, and the screams of war echoed in the distance. But down here, in the shattered remains of an ancient structure, there were no armies, no distractions, just them. Voss wiped a trickle of blood from his forehead. His rifle was lost in the fall, but his knife was still firm in his grip. That was enough. Zora watched him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. This was the human who had torn through her forces. He had survived battles that no one should have walked away from. She tightened her grip on her energy blade. "You fight like a beast, human. Wild, but effective." Voss smirked. "And you talk like you've already won." The queen's golden eyes narrowed. Then she attacked. Her energy blade sliced through the air with incredible speed. Voss dodged, barely missing the deadly edge. He countered with a swift slash of his own, but Zora was faster than any soldier he had fought before. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. Steel against plasma, strength against speed. Voss rolled to the side, avoiding another swing. He lunged forward, striking for her exposed side, but Zora twisted, deflecting the attack with a flick of her wrist. She was strong, stronger than he had expected. Every attack carried the power of a seasoned warrior, but her movements were precise, calculated. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a fighter. For the first time in years, Voss felt a challenge. And he loved it. A battle of equals. The fight moved through the ruins, both warriors testing each other. Zora launched a powerful strike, but Voss ducked low, sweeping her legs. She stumbled, but caught herself, countering with a quick slash that ripped through his shoulder armor. Voss winced, but didn't stop. Pain was nothing new to him. He feinted left, then struck right, his blade slicing across Zora's side, cutting through her armor. She hissed in pain but didn't slow down. Instead, she smiled. "You are interesting, human," she said, her breath steady despite the wound. Voss grinned. "You're not too bad yourself." Then, in a blur of motion, Zora kicked him hard. The force sent Voss crashing into a broken pillar. His vision blurred for a second. When he regained focus, she was already on him, her blade raised. He barely rolled away in time. The energy blade sliced into the stone, leaving a smoking scar where his head had been. Voss pushed himself up, panting. "All right," he muttered. "No more playing around." Zora tilted her head. Agreed. Then they attacked again. Respect in the fight. As they fought, something changed. The attacks became sharper, but also smoother. Each move was answered with a counter. Each strike was tested, blocked, and avoided. It was no longer just a battle. It was a conversation in combat, a silent understanding between warriors. Zora wasn't just trying to kill him anymore. She was studying him. Voss could see it in her eyes. She had come here expecting to crush a mere human soldier. Instead, she had found a warrior worthy of her respect. And Voss. He had spent years fighting aliens, monsters, and machines. He had faced death more times than he could count. But this was different. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just surviving. He was alive. A sudden disruption. Then, a deep rumble shook the ruins. Both warriors paused, looking up. Dust fell from the cracks above, and the ground trembled beneath them. A voice crackled in Voss's earpiece. "Captain, the HFY are pulling back. Something's happening." Zelzora's communicator activated as well. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. A warship is entering the system, unknown origin." She frowned. "What?" Voss and Zelzora exchanged a look. The battle outside wasn't over, but something bigger was coming. Another explosion shook the ruins. Zelzora narrowed her eyes. "This fight isn't finished, human." Voss smirked. "No, it isn't. But for now, they had a bigger problem. And whether they liked it or not, they would have to face it together." The ground trembled as another explosion rocked the ruins. Dust and debris fell from above, and for the first time in the battle, the Elias Voss and Queen Zelzora weren't focused on each other. Something was coming. Something big. Zelzora tapped her communicator. "Report." A panicked voice responded. "Your Majesty, an unknown warship has entered the system. It's not one of ours, and it's not human." Voss's earpiece crackled to life. "Captain, we have a serious problem. We're detecting." The voice was cut off by static. The connection was jammed. Voss and Zelzora locked eyes. For the past few hours, they had been enemies. But now, in the face of an unknown threat, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Survival came first. The arrival. Above them, the sky darkened as a massive warship entered the planet's atmosphere. It was unlike anything Voss had ever seen. Sleek, black, and covered in shifting energy patterns, it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Zelzora took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "This is not one of my Empire's ships." The warship hovered ominously before several smaller crafts detached from its hull, descending like predatory birds. They landed with a metallic hiss, and their doors slid open. From within, they emerged. Tall, skeletal figures wrapped in dark, living metal. Their elongated heads had no visible mouths, only glowing violet eyes that pulsed like dying stars. Voss tightened his grip on his knife. "I'm guessing these aren't friends of yours." Zelzora bared her fangs. "No, and if they are not mine, they are no one's." The strange beings moved in perfect synchronization, their motions eerily smooth. Then, without a sound, they attacked. The first strike. The first alien moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance in seconds. Its arm morphed into a blade, striking straight for Zelzora's head. She dodged at the last second, her energy sword flashing as she countered. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed, the impact sending her skidding backward. Another alien lunged for Voss. He barely managed to duck as a whip-like appendage sliced through the air above him, cutting a deep gash into the stone wall behind him. Voss twisted, slashing upward with his knife. The alien jerked away unnaturally, its body bending in ways no living thing should. They were fast. Too fast. He raised his stolen plasma pistol and fired. The shot hit the creature's chest, but instead of flesh and blood, the wounds seemed to close instantly, like liquid metal reforming. Voss muttered under his breath, "Well, that's just unfair. Temporary allies." Zelzora sliced through one of the creatures, severing its arm. The limb fell to the ground, but within seconds, it began regrowing. Her mandibles clicked in frustration. "They regenerate." Voss gritted his teeth. Figures. 2 more aliens advanced toward them. No hesitation. No emotion. Just pure mechanical precision. Zelzora glanced at Voss. "We need to work together." Voss smirked. "Didn't think I'd hear you say that." She growled. "Just do not slow me down, human." Voss chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." Side by side, They launched their counterattack. The fight for survival. Zora moved like a storm, her energy blade cutting through the air in deadly arcs. She wasn't just strong, she was graceful, her every move a balance of power and precision. Voss fought differently, quick, efficient, and brutal. He didn't waste energy on unnecessary movements. Every dodge, every strike, every shot was calculated to maximize damage while staying alive. And together, they were unstoppable. Voss grabbed a fallen enemy weapon, a strange rifle pulsing with dark energy. He aimed and fired. The shot struck the creature in the head, and this time, it didn't regenerate. He grinned. Looks like headshots work. Zora impaled another alien through the skull. It convulsed, its violet eyes dimming before its body crumbled into dust. She smirked, then aimed for the head. Human. Voss rolled his eyes. Yeah, I got it. More creatures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them. Voss exhaled. I really hope you have a plan. Zora twirled her sword, golden eyes burning with determination. Kill them all. Voss chuckled. Simple. I like it. The battle raged on, a greater threat. Despite their skill, there were too many. For every alien they killed, more took its place. And worse, the warship above was preparing something. A deep, pulsing hum filled the air. The ground vibrated. Energy began gathering at the ship's core. Voss's instincts screamed at him. Something big was coming. Zora felt it too. She turned to him. We need to leave. Now. Voss frowned. Running away? That's not like you. She growled. This is not retreat. This is strategy. If we stay, we die. Voss hated to admit it, but she was right. He tapped his communicator, hoping the signal was back. Team, we need an extraction. No. A voice crackled back. Captain, dropship inbound. Hang tight. Zora signaled her troops. Fall back to the rendezvous point. The two warriors covered each other as they fought their way out, escaping just as a massive energy blast struck the ruins behind them. The shockwave sent them flying. Voss hit the ground hard, his vision spinning. As he pushed himself up, he saw the alien warship hovering above, undamaged, unfazed. For the first time, both human and Selvok realized something terrifying. This war had just changed, and neither of them were ready for what was coming next. The battlefield was no longer just a war between humans and Selvok. A new enemy had arrived. The unknown warship loomed above like a predator waiting to strike. Its dark metal pulsed with violet energy, and the air itself felt heavy with something unnatural. Elias Voss and Queen Zora had barely escaped the ruins, their forces retreating to regroup. But now, standing on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, they both knew one thing: they had to work together. The enemy was not just powerful. It was beyond anything they had ever faced. Regrouping for war, Voss wiped the blood from his brow and turned to Zora. All right, Queen. We both know this thing isn't here for tea. What's the plan? Zora's golden eyes burned with frustration, but she didn't waste time arguing. My forces are regrouping in the Eastern Valley. Your people? Voss activated his communicator. Command, do you read? Static. Then, finally, a response. Captain, we thought you were dead. We're regrouping at Point Delta, but our comms are still jammed. Voss exhaled. Yeah, I noticed. Hold position and prep for an incoming nightmare. He turned back to Zora. We need to break that jamming signal, or we'll be fighting blind. Zora nodded. Agreed. I have scouts reporting a relay tower near the warship. If we take it down, we might regain communications. Voss smirked. Then let's go break some alien tech. The assault on the tower. The relay tower was guarded by the new enemy, the Shadowborn, as Zora called them. No one knew where they came from. No one had ever survived long enough to find out. Voss and a small strike team of elite human soldiers and Selvok warriors approached through the ruins, moving silently. Zora whispered, "If they detect us too early, they will summon reinforcements." Voss nodded. "Then let's do this quick and quiet." They moved through the shadows, blades and suppressed weapons in hand. The enemy was fast, but they weren't expecting an ambush. Zora leaped first, silent as a ghost, her energy blade slicing through the nearest enemy. Voss followed, driving his knife into another's skull before it could react. The rest of the team attacked with perfect coordination, eliminating the patrol in seconds. The tower was in sight. But then, an alarm sounded. They had been spotted. A race against time. The enemy swarmed from all directions. Zora and her warriors formed a defensive line, their energy weapons cutting down the incoming attackers. Voss and his soldiers rushed toward the tower, dodging enemy fire. The tower's control panel was heavily reinforced. They didn't have time to hack it. Voss growled. "Screw it." He pulled out a det pack and slapped it onto the base of the tower. Zora shouted, "Hurry, human." Voss activated the timer. 10 seconds. "Fall back," he roared. The team sprinted as the explosion tore through the tower, sending debris and energy pulses in all directions. A moment later, Voss's communicator crackled. "Command to Captain Voss. We're back online." He grinned. "Damn right we are." The final stand. With communications restored, both human and Selvok forces rallied. The Shadowborn warship began charging its main weapon, a violet energy beam that could wipe out everything in its path. Voss turned to Zora. "Tell me your ships have something that can take that thing down." She smirked. "They do now." Above them, Selvok battleships broke through the clouds, opening fire on the Shadowborn warship. At the same time, human artillery launched a barrage of missiles, targeting the ship's weakened shields. But the warship was still standing, still charging. Voss clenched his fists. Not enough. Then, an idea. He looked at Zora. "How much do you trust me?" She frowned. "Not at all." "Good enough," he said. "Cover me." Before she could stop him, Voss sprinted toward the battlefield. The hero's gamble. Dodging fire, Voss made his way to a fallen Shadowborn craft. The alien ship was mostly intact, if he could pilot it. He climbed inside, pressing random buttons until the engine roared to life. Zora watched from a distance, her eyes widening. "He's insane." The craft lifted off the ground, and Voss aimed it straight for the warship. His communicator crackled. "Captain, what are you doing?" Voss grinned. "Something really stupid." As the warship's main cannon reached full charge, Voss pushed the ship's engines to max, a direct collision course. Zora's voice came through. "Voss, you will not survive that." Voss exhaled. "Yeah, I know." Then, just as impact seemed inevitable, a massive golden light engulfed the battlefield. Zora's fleet had fired everything they had. The warship's shields collapsed. Voss barely managed to eject before his stolen ship slammed into the enemy warship's core. A massive explosion tore through the sky. The warship shattered, its remains crashing into the valley below. Silence fell over the battlefield. The Shadowborn were gone. Victory. For now. Voss lay in the dirt, staring up at the sky. His body ached. His head was spinning. But he was alive. A shadow loomed over him. Zora stood there, her arms crossed. "You are the most reckless human I have ever met," she said. Voss chuckled, wincing. "Yeah, well, it worked, didn't it?" She extended a hand. "Perhaps humans are not a myth after all." Voss took her hand, pulling himself up. "And maybe Selvok aren't all bad." The war was far from over. But in that moment, two warriors from opposite sides had become something new. Not enemies, not just allies, but legends.